I think getting to know Pete took some time too, just because he's a little bit remote or reserved. And building a relationship with somebody who's running for president can be hard because they're so busy and we're just trying to keep up with them.
Hey, Jim Alexander here with Real Talker. Jesse, how's it going?
Hey, Jim, nice to meet you.
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Oh, good. Pretty good. Thank you.
I'm tired from watching all the campaign touring, man. I can only imagine that was a sort of inside look. I had no idea. It just seems exhausting. And I'll tell you, were you part of all these trips too, or just like bits and pieces? I
Oh,
was
no,
wondering
man.
about you also, as much about Mayor Pete being part of the whole trek.
No, I mean, I couldn't keep up with Pete. I mean, we did 90 days of production on this film, which is an awful lot for a documentary, and most of those
Yeah.
by myself. So I really like to do this kind of work without a crew. I think it's the best way to do intimate documentary verite work. Sometimes had my great cinematographer join me and help out. He's Torsten Tilo. But yeah, man, it was a year of the campaign start to finish. And, I didn't need to be on the road every day that Pete was. I mean, picking and choosing those moments was a little bit of an art and a little bit of kind of a crapshoot. And I pretty quickly figured out that like Iowa, New Hampshire, the early states, like they're really important politically, but like often the most valuable shooting was back home in South Bend with Pete, either at the campaign office or home with Chasten. Sometimes being mayor was really interesting to me. And then debate prep. I mean, those were the really interesting opportunities to kind of step behind the curtain.
You know, my favorite scene was actually the one where they're making the food for the dog. I thought it was the most like intimate fly
Yeah.
on a wall sort of thing
I
at
mean,
home. You
yeah.
know, did it feel, in a sense, almost weird for you to be this kind of privately in there? That's like an everyday sort of thing. Unless you're living in that house, you really don't get to see, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think it was really important for me to get to know both of them and to go home with them, and for them to let me in was really important. Uh, and just to see, Pete doing his laundry. I mean, one day he'd be like
Yeah.
in front of 50 cameras, and the next day he'd be home like doing his laundry. And that's the reality of being maybe a young presidential candidate who hasn't been around and is still like putting together his operation, is that he was, he's kind of superhuman, but also in some ways just a regular guy. And I think the chance of this film was to get to know what it's like to be a human being and run for president, which is not a story that I really have seen before, at least in the documentary form. And I love the idea that we could be close to Pete during this intense, incredible experience that he was undertaking, this roller coaster ride with Chasten and at his side. So we signed up not knowing where it would go, and it just took off.
You know, that was one of the things too that I mentioned, that home scene. It's like it looks like a very simple home too, which I think was a metaphor in really how he is as a person. Did you ever kind of think about that in a sense? He's like very simple home. It's not, you think of like candidates, presidential
Mm.
people would be like, mansions and like sort of White Houses
Yeah,
before going to the White House, but it was just like a very much an everyday
yeah,
man, home in South Bend. I thought that was like a really good contrast to
yeah.
with who he is. Did you feel that moment too?
Well, Pete does actually point that out on the debate stage at some point. He notes that like all of the other candidates, are either millionaires or billionaires,
Yeah,
and
yeah, there is a line of that.
he is neither of those things. They had quite a nice house, but by maybe by our sort of expectations of presidential candidates, it felt modest. I just Pete's is kind of superhuman and in some ways, and also quite human. I think you see in the film, and maybe that's true of other presidential candidates, but I haven't really gotten to know any others. So I think getting to know Pete took some time too, just because he's a little bit remote or reserved. And building a relationship with somebody who's running for president can be hard because they're so busy, and we're just trying to keep up with them. But
Yeah.
but I was prepared to be patient. Often that's a lot of what it takes, and a little bit of persistence too. And I think by the time that things really took off, he was kind of used to having me around. And I won't say he liked having me around, because I could be a little bit pushy sometimes maybe, but But we kind of got to know each other a bit, and I was pretty respectful of like how to be in his space and not kind of be too in the way or anything. And that's
Hmm.
important. I mean, I think I'm never invisible. You know, I think it's a mistake to think that the camera is invisible. It's not. But I think that doesn't mean that we didn't see moments of real intimacy. And um, uh, I think that the fact that they were willing to let us in and see some of that their relationship. Also, Pete working with his consultants to try to figure out how to be a better candidate. I mean, these are just parts of the presidential process that I'm not sure we've really seen before. And so I felt very privileged actually to be that close to him as he was going through that.
Yeah, that was a really interesting part too. Like you see them giving him, like they're giving it to him. His team, like
Yeah.
they're being completely outspoken and blunt. And it was a real sense of like, I wondered if Pete ever wondered, like, oh, is this gonna be like see him swear sometimes? You know, like it might change the image of him or whatnot. Like, because I thought it was very raw what you showed, almost in the sense it's too raw. Like as a candidate, like I don't know if I would want to see kind of being, all the stuff that the rawness of these conversations that they're
Yeah.
being depicted and
Yeah.
how he's being coached in a sense too.
Yeah. Well, I think Pete's fearless, and maybe you have to be to
Hmm.
run for president. You have to be confident and fearless. And I think he wasn't afraid to show some vulnerability and show some weakness. And he'd be the first to admit that he has some things to learn about himself and about the country. And to watch him grow in front of us, I think the film is a kind of coming of age story. I mean, he's really coming of age on the national stage, and we see him learn and make mistakes in real time, and that's just the kind of storytelling that I love. And it's true. Sometimes you're like, wow, that's intense, but that's why we got an R rating because Liz Smith, his consultant, swears a lot.
Mm.
I think she's
Yes.
drops the f bomb a number of times. Pete himself doesn't swear very often, but but that's a little bit of like what it takes, you know.
Another for me that the story is almost Chasten's story too, in a way.
Yeah,
Like he's such an integral part of it. Like if he wasn't present, like I don't know how Pete's life, this campaign
yeah.
changes astronomically. What point did you see how important Chasten was not only to Pete but to this whole process of the campaign? Because I feel like it's like the glue that holds down his personal life and the
Yeah.
campaign.
Absolutely. I think that I was a little worried until I met Chasten and recognized that he was the secret weapon, not only of Pete's campaign, uh, but of this film potentially, and that he's just so different than Pete. You know, they're not an
Hmm.
odd couple, but they complement each other in a really interesting, beautiful way. And I love suddenly that there was this emerging love story where I didn't expect that. I mean, I knew that Pete was, in this new marriage, that he was a millennial gay candidate, very out, proud, but and unconventional in that way. But I hadn't expected to make Chasten so much of a focus of our story. But he is so integral to the campaign and to in Pete's life, and he lets us in ways that Pete doesn't, and I think that's so important. And Chasten is also himself growing into this role, and he's kind of a wonderful presence. He's funny. He's emotionally quite kind of open, and I just really liked my time with Chasten too, and I felt like as we were getting further into the campaign that regardless of the outcome, that the film could be a portrait of their relationship that would be evergreen. That would be, whether you knew anything about Pete or not, that this would be a really powerful story to tell. And I think there's something old fashioned about them, but also totally new, in that they were negotiating their roles as this young gay couple on the public stage, and having to figure out sort of how much to make biography part of their public narrative, and when to talk about other aspects of all that they were about, all the other things that Pete's campaign was about too. And because as Chasten says at some point, Pete wasn't running to be president of gay America; he was running to be president for all Americans. And
Yeah.
so and Pete says, his identity as a gay man, for some people that was everything, and for other people it was a minor detail. And I think that high wire walk of identity and biography was just really interesting to observe.
When you follow someone for that amount of time, you start as a filmmaker, especially a documentary. It's like you, and I thought you did a really good job of being unbiased. You showed
Mhm.
the people opposing him. Like, you left everything, I felt, as raw and down the middle as possible.
Yeah.
But did you find yourself kind of becoming friendly with Pete, or in a sense, like, it's liking him more so than as a subject of a film, or
Mhm.
just making that connection as a human would, being around someone in their homes and their intimate spaces
I
like
think,
he's allowed you to? It make you root for him, basically. How did you kind of feel towards later stages of filming as you did early on
yeah,
about him?
no, I think you're right that you relate to somebody as you would another human being, and you do get to
Yeah.
know each other, um, and I think that that relationship of trust sometimes it is the foundation of great documentary storytelling. It's also complicated, and because what Pete's engaged in running for president, and I'm a documentary storyteller, and I don't
Yeah.
owe him anything in terms of how I'm going to tell my story. I think he trusts. I mean, I had made it clear that as a journalist, I would tell the story that I chose to tell, but he had to let me in, and that's asking an awful lot of anybody, whether they're a presidential candidate or just someone you've never heard of. And I think negotiating those relationships is what I've spent my career doing. It's always tricky. I think you're constantly having to kind of draw and redraw the boundaries of those relationships. And I think that there are sort of basic rules that I have. I mean, first of all, is to establish my independence, um,
Hmm.
to be clear and direct and honest with people. I think, I didn't go into this project as a Pete supporter or wanting to make a film that was supportive of Pete, but to understand Pete. And if people, see the film and come away feeling positively about Pete, that's okay. If people come away and like him less, that's okay too. I mean, I think, this is my telling of this story. I think another person would tell a different version of that story. Um, and So it was important to me to also share the film with both Pete and Chasten as we were finishing it, and so we could have a conversation about it. I don't think there need to be any surprises, but I think you owe it to your subjects to share the work with them. Ideally, you share it with an audience, and you all get to talk about it. In this case, it's a little challenging because of the role he occupies in the administration, but I'm proud of the film, and I think for people who think, who know something about Pete, or people who don't know anything about Pete, I think they're going to learn something.
No, God, you've been through this journey with him, and now that it's out there, I think where there's a sense we will see him again. Whether he's running again in the next election or
Mhm.
whatnot. Would you be willing, or maybe that's something you discuss with him, to chronicle his journey once again? If he decides to run again for potentially president, how would you feel about that? Whether
Yeah,
have you thought about that, or is this a one-off
yeah.
for you, or you'd like to tell the journey again,
Uh,
maybe?
I think you should check back with me in 3 years. If he runs, I'm a little close to the experience now to
Uh-huh.
say this is definitely what I would want to do. I mean, um, I'll definitely be interested to see what the next chapter in Pete's career in public
Do
life
you think he
brings.
would run based on what you've kind of seen from him?
I don't, I don't know. I think there's so many variables in our
Hmm.
political sphere and in his life probably that it's just impossible to say, and only he could answer that question, and he probably can't even answer it now. So
That's fair. Well, at least you put a heck of a story the first time around. Like I said, this was obviously the most in depth for a person that doesn't know much about campaigns, or we see the stuff on CNN and TV, the debates, but the insights of it, from the elevator stopping. I mean, these were raw moments that really happened. Very humanistic,
yeah,
I thought, depiction of it, and I thought it was educational. Anyone who follows or fancies themselves in politics, I think it's a really good look at sort of the hardships, and is not as glamorous and as it might be. There's a lot of work on this journey, and moments of ups and downs. So I thought you did a fantastic job chronicling it, as, like I said, as best as a fly in the wall moment of access as you can get as a filmmaker, I'm sure. So you
yeah.
did terrific with that.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Really nice to talk to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for chronicling that, Jesse, and hope to see more from you. More
I hope
interesting
so
stuff.
very much. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much.